Hey, nerdy knitters. Welcome back to the Knitting 411 podcast, where we talk about your knitting questions and answers. Why don't you drop a comment down in the chat box and say hi, tell me where you're from, and we will jump right in. As always, if you're new to the channel, a few things you can find here. We have a free printable guide that will help you understand how to read your stitches and count your rows, which is something that's important for all knitters to understand. And I have a playlist full of short videos. They're less than 60 seconds each, because sometimes you don't want to watch a 5 or 10 minute video just to learn a cast on. You just need a quick refresher, and that's what those videos are for. While we're waiting for more people to join us and say hello, here's something I found this week. The Wool Channel by Clara Parks. I don't know if you're familiar with her, but in the knitting world, she's written a lot of knitting books about fiber. She's got a yarn book and a lot of, let me think. Vanishing Fleece is one I just finished recently that's really good. And wool is her specialty, and she has a whole channel about it now. And it is 2 parts to this. You can find the link right there on that slide. The front-facing part is a free email newsletter where she chats about all things related to wool, like this recent email where there's a wool, the zero waste pencil tin set that features a wool insert. So she finds interesting things that are related to wool. So not just knitting, but wool in general and the many ways it can be used. The second part of that, the Wool Channel, is a paid membership that sort of pays for everything else. There's monthly live streams and a community for those who are really interested in diving deep and chatting with others. Perhaps if you spin or you really like fibers, that's something to think about. So I will jump right in to showing you what I'm working on. I haven't been working on very much this week. Let me see, there we go. For my master knitting, it's sort of been set aside. I've got a website that I maintain as well, and I've been writing a lot of articles this month. I'm trying to do 60,000 words. I'm just about there. I've got about 5,000 more to go, so that's a lot of articles. A lot of them are about different fibers: wool, cotton, linen, cashmere, lots of different things. So if you're interested in learning more about different fibers for knitting, then you can hop over to TanyaKnits.com and look at those articles. They're all published, but they still need some pictures. I have to go back in and add some things, but the words are all there at least. As far as knitting, I just finished these little socks. These were interesting. This started life as one long tube without these toes right there. It was just one long tube. And I cut it right in the middle, and I added the toes, and then I added the heel. So these are sort of afterthought everything socks. And I just recorded all of the bits and pieces for the socks. And you can find, well, that will be released probably next Friday. So it'll be a full tutorial with a free pattern that will show you how to take a tube. You start by doing a 2x2 rib, and you knit the full tube. Imagine those toes aren't there. You knit the full tube and you finish with more rib. And then when you're done, you give it a wash. And we're using wool yarn for this because once it's washed, it's going to hold those stitches, because you're going to cut your knitting right there. And when you cut it, you don't want it to unravel. So if you've washed it, then those stitches are they're really likely to stay in place. And I will show you exactly how to do that next week and add in the toes and the heels, which are knit exactly the same way. There's a heel, there's a toe. And you can get this pattern for these cute shorty socks, our afterthought everything socks. So I've been working on that. And I'm just about finished this lace shawl. I'd like to have it done soon and have the pattern published. It starts with a cute little ruffle on the end. And then a pretty lace design. So it's a nice light shawl, well, scarf really. It's not very wide. For somebody who wants to work on something small and lacy for the summer. That's almost done. That's all I have been knitting. So if you're joining me, why don't you tell me what you've been knitting? leave a comment there and we can chat about your projects too. And we're going to be talking about some ways to work circular knitting in the round. So I thought the book I would recommend this week, I like to show different books and resources for knitters, would be this one, which I use quite a lot. Circular Knitting Workshop by Margaret Radcliffe. Her name's right there on the bottom. This one covers so much. You'll find patterns in this book and lots of techniques. And it's divided up into, there, I think get that glare off there. Just the basic parts are just how to work circularly. So let's go there first for a second. And okay, and it shows you all of the different ways. Yep, there we go. Get rid of that glare. Shows you all the different ways you can knit in the round. There are more than one way. There's more than one way to do that. And then other chapters, bags and hats, scarves and shawls. When you start from the center and work your way out, you want a closed cast on for that. There's a whole section on that. A whole chapter just for socks. And that's the one I was referring to a lot when I was working on these afterthought everything socks. And then mittens and gloves and vests and sweaters. There's even a section on converting flat to circular. I know a lot of knitters will find a pattern either in a flat pattern or something that's sitting around and they want to know how to transfer it the other way. And she's got a whole chapter on taking a pattern that is knit flat and converting it to in the round. So there are lots of instructions and patterns. There's a pattern right there for a garter stitch hat and lots of techniques. So if you like to knit in the round and you like to learn new techniques that you might not be familiar with, this is a great resource to have on your shelf. I refer to this quite a bit. Okay, let's move on to our next section. Every week we chat about a community question, or every 2 weeks, I should say, when we have our live stream. I post a question, I post it over on the community page, and I pin the comment down below the latest live stream. This was the last one. I wanted to know if anybody had ever knit anything inspired by a TV show or a movie. I just recently released a video about a TV show called All Creatures Great and Small, and there was lots and lots of wonderful knitting in the most recent adaptation of that story. It was on PBS recently. So I wanted to know what people were knitting from TV shows. And these are some of the responses. And you can see the results right there. 66% have not knit anything from a TV show, but 32% have. And there are some of the responses. Outlander seems to be one of the most popular things for knitters at the moment. And if you've watched the show, then you've probably seen there are some lovely knits on that show. So I'm going to be working on probably a few videos about that. We'll talk about the history of knitting because the story takes place in about 1750 or about there, around there. And the history of knitting at that time, as well as looking at some of the knit garments that are used in each season of the show. There's lots of beautiful knitting on there. That's probably why it's so popular. Before we get to our new community question, we'll look at this week's questions. We've had 3 here, so we will jump right into those. And if you have any questions you'd like to chat about, be sure to leave a comment in the chat and we will answer your questions today as well. Our first question is from Brian. He is knitting Garlands Around Me by Lisa Haynes. The pattern recommends a bunch of different needle sizes, and he's not sure what needle size and needle length to purchase, and he listed them there below. So there are 2 separate issues here. He says that there are a bunch of needle sizes listed. Actually, there are just 2 needle sizes listed, but what you'll often see in knitting patterns is the various equivalent sizes depending on where you live. If you ever just do an internet search for knitting needle sizes, and you'll find charts that will show you. You can find them in metric. Canadian UK has their own sort of system too, and the US system, and even the Japanese system, and they're all completely different. So patterns usually will have metric and US sizes. So if you see 4 knitting needle sizes listed, it's most likely just 2 knitting needle sizes, and they have put the equivalent sizes for US or metric, or perhaps one of the others as well. So when he says there are 4, in his question, there are actually 2 sizes. And it's common to have 2 different needle sizes for the same pattern. Usually that happens when the designer wants you to use one size for either casting on or binding off, or for working the cuffs on a smaller, tighter gauge, and then changing needle sizes to work the body of the garment. So you'll often see 2 different sizes recommended in one pattern. So there aren't 4 sizes listed in that pattern. They're actually just 2. She's just listing them in metric and in the US sizes. The second part of that question was about needle lengths, and these can vary. All different needles here, double pointed needles. I'm not sure what, okay, these are 8-inch double pointed needles. You can get them shorter than this, 4 inches or 6 inches. And there's also straight needles, and those can come in a variety of lengths as well. And then circular needles, they can be fixed or they can be interchangeable, where you can change out the cords and the needle tips. And those can come from, in normal sizes, from 16 inches all the way up to 30, 40, even 60 inches plus. I don't really use, I think I used a 60-inch once, maybe for a blanket, and that's it. Most of the ones I use are probably 24, 32 inches long. I can use those to knit flat. I don't really use straight needles all that much. I use double pointed, but for knitting flat, I still prefer circular needles, because the weight of the cord, or the weight of the garment or the project, is on the cord, and it's not sitting on my needles and then hitting my arm, or I'm not carrying all that weight. So I like to use circular needles even if I'm knitting flat. And you don't want the stitches sliding across a really long cable. So I like to use a cable that's shorter than the actual project. If I'm knitting in the round, then I'll still use probably a 24-inch or a 32 even for like the body of a sweater. And then we get into smaller circumferences. We're going to answer a question about that later. The different ways you can knit small circumferences in the round. Hey, Marina, thanks for joining me today. It's good to see you again. There are lots of different ways to knit small circumferences in the round, and those use even smaller needles. You can use circular needles that they might even be 8 or 9 inches around. So we're talking a really small circumference for those needles. They're tiny. So we have the needle sizes and then also the needle lengths. So I do recommend choosing a smaller circumference if you're knitting in the round than the actual project, because you don't want to be stretching those stitches out as you knit. You want them to move around pretty easily. Okay, that takes care of our first question. And our next one was Heidi. She wanted to know about beginner baby hat patterns, where to find them. This was posted in the chat in our last live stream, and we had some recommendations. Different people chimed in there, but I did a quick search, and I figured I would share some patterns that I found. There we go, right there. These are all, I would say, beginner appropriate. You'll find links for all of them down in the video description box. Barley by Tin Can Knits. Tin Can Knits has a whole series of patterns called the Simple Collection that are basically to help new knitters learn how to knit various garments. They've got hats and scarves, a cardigan, a sweater, socks, like all of the basic garments that you might want to knit. And they've got good tutorials, lots of good illustrations, and they come in a huge variety of sizes, from adult down to baby. And one of their patterns, Barley, is a hat. It's worked just a basic rib for the brim, and then the body of the hat has one section of garter stitch, and then the rest is stockinette. So you practice doing some garter stitch It's either garter stitch or reverse stockinette. I can't tell from the picture. But so you'll be practicing doing some purling in the round as well. So it's not all knitting. So that's a good practice hat. And then two more that I found. They're all free patterns, by the way. Basic Baby Hat by Heather Tucker. This one is fairly simple. It's on a website. It's just a basic brim. And then you knit in stockinette, knitting every round, and then you're working set decreases, knit togethers and SSKs to create those decrease lines. And then there's the classic cuffed hat by Purl Soho. Theirs does use, I can't think of what it's called. I just lost my words. Oh, to cast on, a tubular cast on, but you can just substitute your own basic stretchy cast on, like the long tail cast on will work just fine. And this one has a longer cuff that you can roll up, but it's still very basic. All of them, it's just, you have to know how to knit in the round, how to join and knit in the round, how to work a couple of decreases, knit two together in SSK, and of course, how to knit and how to purl for all of the ribbing on each of those hats. So Heidi, if you pop back in, there are some hat recommendations for you. And our last question is from Franca. She wants to, this one was related to, I had asked a question this week over on the community page of the YouTube channel. Here, I asked what kind of garments and projects people were interested in learning to knit next. And Franca left this comment that she wanted to do socks and sweaters, but she was right now working on DPN and magic ring. I think she means magic loop and understanding those. So we are going to dive into the different ways you can knit small circumferences in the round. Because if you have a large project, well, a hat or anything wider, you'll use a 16-inch circular needle or 24-inch or 32-inch, depending on how big the project is. So you just join it and you start knitting in the round, and there's nothing particularly difficult about that. But when you have a small circumference, like a sock or a baby hat or a sleeve on a sweater, that 16-inch circular is still too big for that size. So we call that knitting small circumferences in the round because they are small circumferences. So there's actually 5 different ways you can knit those, and we're going to tackle that next. And Marina, I see your question. We will get to that right after our last question that was submitted. So these are the 5 ways that you can knit small circumferences in the round. You can use double pointed needles, just like these. We're going to demonstrate that. And you can use flexible double pointed needles. That's, pull them out right here. I'll make that screen bigger in a second, but they are double pointed needles with a flexible bend in the middle, and you only need 3 instead of 4 or 5 of those. And then there is the magic loop method, or the traveling loop method, which is the same idea, but it uses a shorter cable. And there's a method called the 2 circulars. And then there's also short circulars. I don't have any short circulars. They're on my wish list to buy someday, but I put a picture here so you can see how small they are. They can be as small as 8 inches up to 14 inches. So they're still smaller than the normal 16-inch circular needles that you might find for knitting hats. So if you like knitting in the round and you don't want to fiddle with extra needles, all of these other methods use more than the 1 circular needle, then short circulars might be a good investment for you. But I'm going to demonstrate these different methods. Let's go right here. All right, so our first method is the standard double pointed needles. And I've already cast on a whole bunch of stitches. I prefer to cast them all onto 1 needle and then divide them. I just find that a little bit easier. So once you have them all, I think I've got about 30 stitches here. So I'm just going to put on 10 stitches onto each needle. Okay, there's the first 10. While I'm doing this, Marina, I think we can discuss your question. it's your first time making a sweater, what stitch should you use for the main torso? Well, I'm always a fan of stockinette because it's simple and you can work on all of the other things. Like if there's any sleeve shaping or neck shaping or waist shaping, you don't have to be concerned about that in stockinette. It's all pretty basic. If you have anything that is a major stitch pattern, you have to take that into consideration as you knit the sweater, and that gets a little more difficult. So I'd stick to something really basic, or maybe even something, if you want some texture, maybe a moss stitch or a seed stitch, something that is only a few stitches, like the pattern repeat is only a few stitches wide. Do you have a pattern that you're using, or are you just making it up as you go? Okay, so we have all of our stitches and we've divided them up. The next thing to do, I like to just lay it down and make sure everything is where it should be, because you don't want to twist your cast on. So I lay it all out just like that. And my cast on edge is all right here along the inside edge. Nothing's twisting around. The tail is there out of my way. So I sometimes just leave it right here on the table. Oh, let me get up there where you can see it. Sometimes I leave it right here on the table so I can make sure everything stays where it should be. So make sure I've got enough yarn here. And I will take my first. All right. Now, this is where it gets confusing. You have to remember the stitch you're working from is on your right needle, and the stitch you're going to work next is on the left. So when you're getting them in position, just remember that your last stitch worked, or the last one you cast on, is right here, and the next stitch you're going to knit is right there on the left. So right and left. You have to remember that, and that's probably it, really. And then you just pick up your yarn, whatever hand you're using. You don't have to do anything special. There are different techniques you can use for casting on, making an extra stitch and all of that, but I just cast on and join in the round. That first one is a bit fiddly, so I make sure I give it a good tug and keep it really tight to that needle so I don't end up with a ladder right there. And then I just start working across this needle. And you're always working from right to left. And then you finished all the stitches on that needle. This is now the right hand needle. Well, actually it's going to be dropped. You're going to put your empty needle in your right hand. And the next set of stitches are in your left hand. And I like to pull the needle I'm using so it's sitting on top of the other two. I just think it's easier to have them underneath, at least for me. You might have to find your own method to see what works. And this is where people end up getting a ladder between their stitches. I even had one, it still happens to everybody. You can probably see it. Let me see. When I stretch my sock out, I can see where I use double pointed needles for this. Right there, there's a line right there. I can see it. It's pretty faint, but it's there. And right there, it happens to everybody. So to minimize it as much as possible, get back to where I was. Okay. See, if I set them down, you have to pick them up and pay attention to what's going on so you don't go back the wrong way. My last stitch worked is over here. The next stitch I'm working is over here. So get them in position. Get your yarn ready and start knitting. And I don't tug on the first stitch. Well, I probably do give a little tug. But the next stitch, I knit that one more firmly. And that seems to eat up any slack that might be between those two needles. And that's all there is to knitting on double pointed needles. We'll do one more right here because I have one more tip to share. So you knit across, then you have this empty needle, and that gets transferred to this hand. And I like to push the stitches to the middle so they're not going to fall off. And then I move the needle so it's sitting underneath that needle. And then I make sure this needle's on the top, slide my stitches up, and then I tug that second stitch. But I also, there's a tendency to hold your needles far apart. And that's where you get gaps. It doesn't matter if you're knitting flat or in the round. If you do this, you're going to start stretching out that work right there. So as you're switching between needles, just keep them close together and work them a little more firmly, and that'll reduce the likelihood of those ladders in between. Another way to control them is to move your stitches over a few. Like you could stop right there and grab another needle, and you'll reduce the likelihood of ladders because you're constantly moving the stitches around. And we're back to the beginning of our round, and we can see right there is still a big gap, but that will close up because I'll continue to keep my stitches close together, and I can use the tail to weave in on the end. So that is the first way to knit small circumferences in the round, and probably one of the most common. The next one is, well, I'll show you these. I didn't cast any stitches on, but it's the same idea. They are double pointed needles, but they have these flexible bits in the middle, so you can bend them like that. So you only need 3 of them. And what you do in this case is, like the 2 circulars method, all of your stitches will be on 2 needles. But different from that method is you'll use the 3rd needle to work across the stitches. I have a whole video about using Addi FlexiFlips. That's what these are. So you divide your stitches between the 2 needles, join to work in the round, and then you just knit with this one, that small circumference in the round. These are a good option. I think they have them in larger sizes now as well, but they are very useful for socks, for sock knitting. If you don't like double points, but you don't want to do with magic loop or 2 circulars, then that's a good option too. Okay, magic loop was the other one that Franca wanted to know about. So we will look at that next if I can get all my needles out of the way here. And if anybody has any questions, be sure to leave them in the chat and we'll address them after we finish with this question. Okay, so I've cast on my stitches onto one long needle. Usually, depending on how many you're casting on, you could use up to like a 42-inch needle. I don't really find the need to go that large, especially if it's a small thing, as long as I can hold them comfortably and I have enough slack on the needle. So cast on your stitches. Then what you're going to do is slide them to the middle of the cable and then divide them. I'm just going to roughly divide them in half, but this is useful if you're knitting socks and you want to divide for like the top of the toe and the bottom of the toe. Then you divide like this. And like double points, you want to see where your stitches are and get them in the right order and make sure you're not twisting anything. So you want the working yarn to come from the back needle. Hi, Kaz. Good to see you here again. So while you're working magic loop, the working yarn is on the back needle, and you're going to pull the front stitches up onto their needle, and you're going to pull this needle right out, and those back stitches are just going to sit on the cable. And grab, let me see if I can find not the tail. Okay. Get your yarn, bring it underneath. If you carry it over this way, okay, let me look at that right there. If I take this yarn and come and knit this way, you see what's going to happen right there? You get this loop right there, and you think you've made you think you've dropped a stitch or you added a stitch. It's just the way you carried the yarn over. You can just drop it off the needle if you accidentally do that between there. Make sure it's not a stitch. Make sure it is just like an accidental loop, but bring it from underneath. And for this first stitch, on every time I turn, I like to sort of pinch the cable to the needle, and that keeps you from getting because you can still get ladders in this method too. That's not just a thing for double pointed needles. Okay, so I've got to put this in my left. Well, I'll try to do it with my right. So just like regular double pointed needles or any joining in the round, just going to join, knit that first stitch, and I'm sort of pinching it with the cable behind so I don't get a gap right there. And then you just start knitting across. It's been a while since I've knit with my right hand. Okay, so while I'm knitting across, I just wanted to say, Kaz, I remembered your question from a few weeks ago. You asked about boxy sleeveless sweaters for summer. So I just finished recording a video that features 8 of them. I know we talked about a few last time, but I thought you might want a few more suggestions. So that video is coming out on Friday. That one's just for you. But I've been thinking I would like to knit some easy summer tops. And so I made a whole video about them using your suggestion for those boxy sleeveless tops. And I found some really fun ones. So that'll be coming out this Friday. Okay, after you finish your stitches, you're going to turn your work, flip it over. Oh, and this happens sometimes too. You get the yarn stuck around the cable. It's really fine. It'll work its way out next time around. Turn your work, and now your yarn, your working yarn, is on the back needle still, and you're going to bring the front stitches up on their needle. And oh, it's a bit tight. This is another thing, when you knit tightly those first few stitches, it's hard to get them back up on the needle. Okay, and then you take your back needle, pull it out, and let those stitches sit on the cable. Too many yarns here. Okay, and this is where we get that gap. So I just like to pinch them together, pinch the cord with that needle to sort of lessen the likelihood, but don't knit them tightly, because when you go to put that back stitch back on the needle, it'll be really tight and hard to move up there. And then you just keep knitting across. So this is magic loop. You can see I'm not using a whole giant cord. It's pretty small, but it's big enough to do this comfortably and have extra cord on each side. So if you don't want to fuss around with double points, magic loop is my preference. I use this a lot because it's easy to divide your stitches there. And then you turn, divide them into 2 instead of into 3, or however many needles you're trying to do with double points. So we get back in position. The stitches that need to be worked are on the front. Our working yarn is on that back stitch. So we can pull this needle up, pull our stitches up onto that needle, pull this needle through, and continue knitting. And that's how you would work magic loop. Now, another alternative, this is the last one, I promise, is 2 circulars. This is probably my least favorite because I'm very frugal, and I use my double point. No, I use double pointeds and I use my interchangeables for everything. So I don't have 2 of the same size. That's what they usually call for. I'm actually using 2 different sizes because I don't have 2 of the same size. If you have a lot of needles, or you like to buy double sets, then this might be a good choice for you. But you need 2 needles, preferably the same length and the same needle tip size. So I'm using 2 different ones because I don't have 2 of the same. So I'm cheap. So all right, so this one, you have to knit whatever side you're, okay, like magic loop. You set things up. The stitches you're working on are facing you, and the stitches you finished are behind. And that working yarn is right there on the back. And you're going to work on these stitches. But you're going to ignore this back needle altogether. I'm not going to use it at all. We're just going to use the front needle. We're going to use both sides of that front circular needle to knit across these stitches, and that will keep those stitches on this needle. Because if you have a tendency to grab that back needle, all of your stitches are going to end up on one needle, which is not something you want when you're knitting in the round. So I've already started this one because it's just joining in the round like any other way you join in the round. You hold your stitches together and just start knitting. So I'm using my 2 needles. We bring the stitches up onto this needle. And I've got the other end of that same circular needle. It's probably hard to see here. The same circular needle. I'm ignoring the other circular needle. And you just knit across those stitches. And this is known as the 2 circular method. And a lot of people like to use this one too. And I would probably try it more if I had 2 sets of circular needles that were the same size, but I don't. So I use magic loop instead, which is very similar. And we finished, and we pull those stitches through and let them sit on their cable and turn our work. and we're back in position. These are the stitches we need to work. There's our working yarn. We put these up on the needle. We grab the same needle. Make sure you're not grabbing that back needle now, and you knit across. Okay, there. I think that's all the methods. Good. So we've discussed double points and flexible double points. Well, we didn't demonstrate that, but I have a whole video just for those if you want to go learn more about using those. You can see them right here. And magic loop and 2 circulars and short circulars. So those are all the ways you can knit small circumferences, baby hats, socks, anything, or sleeves. I can't think of anything else that is that small, but any of those. Let me just get a quick drink. Okay, and that's all the questions we have submitted. So let's see what we've got for questions here. Hi, there I am. Okay, Kaz, you've got a question? Okay. When knitting on knit purl the purls, do you knit the purl and purl the knits for a blanket? When knitting on knit purl the purls, I'm not quite sure what you mean. Is this garter stitch, seed stitch, something else? When knitting on purl the purls, do you knit the purl and purl the knit? I'm not sure what you're asking. It depends on the pattern. If you're knitting stockinette, you knit on the right side, purl on the wrong side. If you're knitting, garter stitch. Well, garter stitch is knit every row. If you're knitting it in the round, if you're knitting garter stitch in the round, you have to knit around and then purl around and then knit around and purl around and repeat that. If you're knitting it flat, you just knit every row because you're turning it and you're going back the other way. So you're getting those garter bumps, the ridges. So does that answer your question? If you're knitting it flat, well, it's for a blanket, so I assume it's flat. Then you're going to knit every row. There's no purling involved. But if it's in the round, yes, then you have to knit one row and then purl one row and then repeat that. So it can be confusing. Garter stitch is easy, and then all of a sudden you're trying to do it in the round and you realize, oh wait, got to change what I'm doing here. Does anybody else have any questions? And while we're waiting for those, let's look at, this one. This week's community question, you'll find it pinned underneath. After we're done with the live stream, it's not there yet, but it will be this afternoon or later on, or just leave your comment in the chat. Our new question is, are you a sock knitter? And if you are, how many pairs have you knit? When I posted this, I put, I've never knit socks and never plan to, and then 1 to 2 pairs, 3 to 9, 10 plus. And I forgot to put, I've never knit, but I want to knit socks. So a lot of people were leaving that comment that they haven't knit them, but they plan to. So just if you want to pop over and answer that question, then it's there. And if you haven't knit socks, you'll want to tune in next Friday. Not this Friday, this week. It'll be all about boxy summer tops. But next Friday, we've got a tutorial for these little afterthought everything socks. You're going to knit a tube, and then you're going to cut your knitting. I'll show you exactly how to do it. I even messed it up, but I recorded it and I showed you how to fix it because you can mess it up, but we're going to use wool yarn for this pattern, and wool is sticky and will hold its shape. So even if you cut it and you drop stitches somewhere, they're very easy to pick up. So I'll show you how to make those next week. If you're new to sock knitting, there's no short rows, no heel flaps, no gussets. It's just a flat toe and a flat heel. They're worked exactly the same. So basically you need to know how to knit two together and SSK, and that's it. And knit and purl, of course. Question from Marina. So Kaz and Marina, have either of you knit any socks, or did you already answer this question and I missed it? Oh, my inspiration to start knitting. Well, I homeschooled my daughter. She's 17 now. She's never actually been to public school. She's always been homeschooled. And let me see, it was 2017. That's when I started knitting. So not very long ago. But about then I'd been homeschooling, and I sort of, whenever I'm doing and focused on, I sort of dive right in and learn everything about that thing. And she's almost done. She's got one more year of high school, and then she's off to college. So when we started about high school time, I was looking for something new. Since I was just about to be finished homeschooling, I needed something new, some new creative outlet. And my sister-in-law had just moved to the area, and we were visiting with them quite a lot. And she is a knitter. So I just asked her to teach me. And she told me what to buy. I went out and I bought some double-pointed needles and some cotton dishcloth yarn. And I thought I got a great deal. I'm like, 5 needles in one package, and I only really need 2. So I was giving the other ones to my mother-in-law. I had no idea that I was going to need all of them to knit small circumferences in the round. So she showed me how to do that heirloom dishcloth where you knit and you start at one point. Oh goodness, I think I've got it here somewhere, but I don't know where it is. Oh, there it is. My first dishcloth right there. You can see how terrible it is. Here, we'll put it up big. Yeah, that's the first, bad stain on there. But yeah, I started right, you could see how terrible my tension was. But that was the first thing I ever knit. My daughter likes to pull this out and show me. See how far you've come, Mom. So I started knitting because my sister-in-law, I wanted some way to connect with her since we were spending quite a lot of time with them at the time. Put that back up. So I just started, and I fell in love right from that first dishcloth, as difficult as it was. And I was a really tight knitter when I started. And like anything, I sort of dove in obsessively. I found Ravelry. I started buying knitting books. I discovered the Knitting Guild Association and their courses. And I started knitting in 2000, in the fall 2017. And then I started one of their courses, their basics course, either later that year or early 2018. So, and then I started the Master Knitter course. I wasn't even knitting for 6 months, I don't think, at that point when I started level 1. So everything I learned through those programs from doing all of the research. And I love knit. I love that it's, here, let's talk. We don't need that right now. I love that it can be super relaxing, garters or just stockinette, and just relax and Netflix and knitting, just really simple. When I want something mindless, just for my hands to be busy. And dishcloths. I agree. Yes, I knit a lot of dishcloths. When I want something just mindless and small, or I love to do dishcloths when I'm working on a swatch and I want to try a new stitch pattern. But I also like that it can be challenging. Like, you can have your Netflix knitting, but if you want something that's a little more intricate, or you want to learn something new, there's so much to explore. There's so many things I still haven't done. I haven't knit a saddle shoulder sweater. That's on my list. Or an Aran sweater with all the cables and things. I haven't done that yet. I haven't knit any animals or creatures. My daughter wants me to start knitting those. There's lots of things. There's so many things to explore. There's techniques, there's designs, there's just so much. I love it. Oh, socks. I love socks. Did you do like the heel flap and gusset, or was it short rows? Those are my Netflix knitting too, because they're small and they're portable. And especially if you do like afterthought things, then you're like knitting a tube. It's really simple. And you can try new techniques and new things and new stitch patterns. You tried to knit a shawl. You weren't successful. What happened? I want to know. I think that's all of our questions for today. Thank you for joining me. Nice chatting with you again, Kaz and Marina. And Kaz, you be sure on Friday, I've got that video about those boxy summer tops. I think I'm going to be knitting one this summer too. Over a year ago since you knit the socks. I've knit so many, I can't remember what I haven't tried yet. There's lots of goodness, even just the heels. There's so many different ways to knit a heel. So got to explore some more ways to knit socks, I think. What time? Oh, Kaz, yes, 9 o'clock Eastern time on Friday. I'll have that video for you. There were a few. I put the links in the last live stream, a couple of that I remembered, those boxy tops. But I've got 6 more ideas for you that you can see on Friday once that's ready to go. There we go. Let me see. And I think that is all of our questions for today. It was so great chatting with you guys. Thank you for joining me. And for those who are catching the replay, I will put for those catching the replay, I'll put a playlist right here with back episodes that you can catch up and see what we've been talking about. And don't forget to leave your response for our community question down below in the pinned comment. I don't remember what this week's was. I think it's socks. If you've knit socks, you can leave comments about what you've knit for socks down there. And it was a pleasure chatting with you again. Thank you for joining me.